Shakespeare's work encompasses many iconic protagonists, whether it's the young couple Romeo and Juliet, the anxious and distressed Hamlet, or the power-hungry Lady Macbeth. Anyone with a cursory knowledge of Shakespeare has most likely heard of these characters and has an idea about what role they play. For this video, I want to turn the focus onto side characters within Shakespeare plays that have great impact on the main characters as well as the play themselves. In this analysis, I will be looking at two servant/side characters from Shakespeare plays. Enobarbus from the play Antony and Cleopatra, who serves under Mark Antony, and Camillo from The Winter's Tale, who serves under Leontes and Polixenes. To begin, let's start with Enobarbus. Enobarbus is a lieutenant in the Roman military serving under his friend Mark Antony. Enobarbus is a sensible character in the play, willing to criticize the actions of his superior without fear of admonishment or scorn. He provides apt skepticism of Antony and Cleopatra's relationship, and is often able to see the looming disaster that awaits from the dwindling leadership of Antony. A very important role that Enobarbus has in Antony and Cleopatra is as a conveyor of information. In a way, he can be viewed as a middleman that witnesses the complex and striking relationship between the two protagonists, Antony and Cleopatra, and transfers what he sees to the audience. One great example of this can be seen as Enobarbus talks to a few curious Roman soldiers about the Egyptian queen. Quote, "Never he will not. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale. Her infinite variety other women cloy, the appetites they feed, but she makes hungry. Where most she satisfies, for vilest things become themselves in her, that the holy priests bless her when she is riggish." In this moment, he is acting as a conveyor of Cleopatra's beauty and power to not only his soldiers, but to the audience of the play as well. Enobarbus is also exposing a piece of Mark Antony, showing to the audience the charm that has engulfed him. In her article, Infinite Variety, Uncertainty in Judgment in Antony and Cleopatra, Janet Edelman discusses uncertainty as an essential feature of the play. Much of this uncertainty manifests in constant questioning of motivations throughout the play. Edelman writes, "Throughout the play, the characters themselves question its meaning for us. The questioning is so habitual that it occurs explicitly." Throughout the play, no other character is willing to inquire into the motivations and lacking leadership of his superior more than Enobarbus. In fact, Edelman describes Enobarbus as, quote, "that inveterate judge of others." This is a crucial expansion to the role of Enobarbus that is very important to consider. Not only does Enobarbus convey information to the audience, but he also acts as a judge able to see the path to destruction that the ineffable love of the protagonist is leading to. In Disappearing Act, The Role of Enobarbus in Antony and Cleopatra by David Reed, the theme of uncertainty and ambivalence in the play is expanded on, especially as it relates to one scene in particular. This scene revolves around Enobarbus' death. Reed describes Enobarbus' death, saying, quote, "For possibly the only time in Shakespeare's plays, a character falls over dead on stage for no apparent reason other than that he feels deeply ashamed of himself." Reed argues that Enobarbus' death represents a withdrawal from tragedy, that is to say, that his death does not have many of the characteristics of a tragic demise that the audience might expect to see, and that Antony and Cleopatra themselves endure. Enobarbus' death represents a clear retraction of his Roman sensibilities and level-headedness he has shown throughout the play up until this point, where his own death comes from the immense pain of his emotions. This scene will be expanded on later in the video. Reed also discusses Enobarbus' attitude and qualities before his demise, making note of his measured and calculating approach to the mess that he sees before him. Reed writes, quote, "Enobarbus' measurements toward the end of his time on stage alternate between irony and dead seriousness, and acknowledging the futility of Antony's position." In many respects, Enobarbus represents the calculating and stoic personality that Antony once was defined by. But as Antony neglects his military duties to spend time with his beloved queen more and more, Enobarbus is never truly able to leave his former superior, and he meets a premature end, just as do the protagonists of the play. Switching to The Winter's Tale, let's discuss the character Camillo. Camillo is a nobleman of Sicilia who serves under the king Leontes. Camillo is an honest man, and his good judgment helps the other characters to avoid catastrophe and steer the play in the direction of a happy ending. Camillo serves under both the king of Sicilia, Leontes, and the king of Bohemia, Polixenes, but maintains a level of agency that allows him to affect the play. A major role Camillo has in The Winter's Tale is illuminated in his relation to Leontes, the king of Sicilia. Camillo's status is quickly made known in the play, making his ability to reason take a backseat to the whims of the king. Although he may have been a decent ruler, at the start of this play Leontes is consumed by fierce jealousy and anxiety, worrying that his wife, Hermione, is being unfaithful to him with his childhood friend Polixenes. After Leontes confides in his servant about his growing jealousy, Camillo responds, quote, "Good my lord, be cured of this diseased opinion, and betimes, for 'tis most dangerous." This interaction between the two separates them. Leontes is gripped by his irrational anxieties, but Camillo is not willing to play along with his superior, but rather challenges his anxieties based on his good judgment and will. In his article, Leontes' Jealousy in the Winter's Tale, Murray Schwartz writes, Leontes turns to Camillo in his desperation to restore the correspondence of inner desires and outer actualities. His wish for, quote, "servants true about me, that bear eyes to see alike mine honor as their profits," bespeaks his growing obsession with converting the outside world into the form of his fantasy. What Leontes wants of his servant Camillo is affirmation of his paranoia. However, Camillo is unwilling to give this, and he declines his master's task of poisoning Polixenes. Camillo outlines his loyalty in Act 1, Scene 2, when he says to Leontes, "My gracious lord, I may be negligent, foolish, and fearful. In every one of these no man is free. But, beseech your grace, be plain with me, let me know my trespass by its own visage. If I then deny it, 'tis none of mine." While Camillo is unwilling to do the malicious task asked of him, he maintains his openness and honor with his superior. Throughout the play, Camillo must bear the burden of keeping a cohesion between the characters. Once Polixenes is banished and sent back to Bohemia, Camillo goes with him. Camillo advises Perdita and Florizel to travel to Sicilia, in a trip that himself and Polixenes will go on as well. Once the characters are back in Sicilia, it allows for the congealing of the two families and maintains the happy ending that Camillo was pushing for at the start. The two servant characters are put in very similar situations in their respective play. Both witness their masters become gripped with a passion that they are not able to overcome. For Enobarbus, it is Mark Antony's love for Cleopatra that holds him, and for Camillo, it is Leontes' jealousy over Hermione. After displaying their loyalty to their superiors, both servants come to betray their masters at some point. Enobarbus eventually leaves Antony, a decision he comes to regret, and Camillo refuses to poison Polixenes, understanding the consequences that would bring. Regardless of the similar position of both characters, the outcomes of the two different plays are vastly different. Genre is what defines this difference. Genre is the main factor in separating the role of Enobarbus versus Camillo, as well as what happens to the two characters at the end of their play. The Winter's Tale is a romance. Camillo plays an active role in steering the direction of the play away from disaster. He does not capitulate to the commands of his unreasonable king, and he does not poison anyone based on Leontes' delusions. When Camillo and Polixenes are banished from Sicilia, they eventually return at the behest of Camillo for a wholesome ending in Act 5. Enobarbus and Antony and Cleopatra is a much different story. Enobarbus has almost no agency and no influence over the course of the play, but rather he is swept up in the same tide of tragedy that takes the life of both protagonists. His death represents a shift from his stoic and measured attitude to a complete surrender to fate. While Camillo in The Winter's Tale has agency to avoid disaster, Enobarbus, an Antony and Cleopatra, is consumed by disaster along with his master, Mark Antony.